Hello again, everyone. Thank you once again for joining us here for Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather in this 30th day of May 2020. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, hosting today's show again. Up first on the breakup map, really winding down. In fact, it's just about ended. Some open water now along the Colville as there has been on the upper stretch, and then now a pretty widespread area of open water on the lower half, almost all the way out to the coastline. And the other two rivers there, Kaparik and the Sagawon, some open all the way out to the coastline. And so there probably won't be any type of flooding due to ice jamming on any three of those rivers. So moving on to fire danger, really expanded in the extreme and even the high, but mostly the extreme areas kind of grew all along the Yukon River there. Until you get to the lower Yukon, and it's high to very high, and the Delta doesn't have any fire danger at all. But extreme extending out into the eastern Seward Peninsula there, due to easterly winds and temperatures in the 70s out there today. Same thing up over the Kobuk Valley in toward Noatak, and where Noatak had 72 degrees at early afternoon today, and Teller all the way out there in the western Seward Peninsula pushed up to 72 as well. Golovin, Noatak Valley up to 75. Golovin east of Nome had 75 today, and temperatures near 80 in the central interior. Nenana pushing about 80 degrees this afternoon, along with some gusty winds that really elevated the danger there with winds 22, some cases 30, 35 miles an hour, most over the higher elevations out of the east-northeast. Otherwise, some high fire danger down around northeast Bristol Bay, Igagit, King Salmon, and westward there near Dillingham. And also Kenai area, Soldotna. No showers there yet, but a little bit up in the Susitna Valley and the Anchorage area. But there is rain and showers moving westward, already raining in Palmer. And Russian Lake on the Kenai Peninsula had about 0.05 of an inch here this afternoon, some shower activity that's much heavier over the Prince William Sound area. Moving on to the hazardous weather graphic, that's a red areas there for Tanana, Fairbanks, Eagle, Northway and the surrounding areas. That's a red flag warning for extreme fire danger and the gusty winds and temperatures in the 70s, humidity 20 to 22%. Expected to last till about 10 p.m. this evening, at which time rapid ignition and spread of any fire that gets going could occur, again with the breezy conditions. And from there, no other watches, warnings, or advisories out around the state for the next 24 hours. Satellite imagery showing clear skies over the interior there, but clouds spreading west and northwest, actually getting north of the Alaska Range now, Northway, Tok, up toward Eagle, getting on the outer edge of that cloud band there. And also clouds developing over the Yukon and Kuskokwim River lower valleys and eastern deltas, with some thunderstorm activity actually kicking off there. And then clouds and rain and showers moving west-northwest from the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, to the Chugach and Talkeetna Mountains. And not too bad over the Panhandle, a few isolated showers this afternoon, and generally cloudy, but there were some sunbreaks in a few locations. And frontal boundary weakening, but still weakening this afternoon, but brought 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts to Cold Bay earlier today, and in Alaska seeing gusts of 40 miles an hour, and also brought about 0.6 of an inch of precipitation there to Unalaska earlier on. The front has moved eastward now and weakening quite rapidly, but now still winds gusting to about 30 to 40 miles an hour, St. George Island and St. Paul, with rain just now showing up at St. George, and then clouds and showers over the western and central Aleutians. Breezy conditions but clear skies, north slope in the Arctic coast with winds up there Anywhere from 25 gusts to as high as 40 miles an hour, strongest along the eastern Arctic coast, but quite windy across the North Slope as well. And you can see that low in the Gulf looks like it's actually trying to pull back to the west and lift a little to the north as higher pressure begins to build south of that in advance of that low that's south of the Aleutian chain there. As it pushes eastward, it's building high pressure out in advance of that, and that's tending to shove that very persistent low that was west of the Panhandle northward. Otherwise, on the chart today, you can see thunderstorms rather far to the west developing, seeing some lightning strikes showing up, again with the warm temperatures helping trigger those afternoon thunderstorms there on the lower Yukon River Valley areas, and also Kuskokwim Valley and up along the Alaska Range, eastern Copper River Basin, and moderate rain today, 6-hour rainfall amounts, as I mentioned, half an inch both at Cordova and Valdez, and showers developing over the Kenai Peninsula, capping off the temperatures there, as well as much of south central Alaska from what we saw yesterday as the clouds increase and the moisture. And just some isolated showers there over the Panhandle. That low now too far off to the west to really be much of an effect. And rain, gusty winds, eastern Aleutians, and pushing into the Alaska Peninsula, up to the Pribilofs, extending back across central Aleutians with a lot less wind. And then just some scattered showers out over the western Aleutians, cloudy skies. And really not much in the way of fog along the Arctic coast. If there was any, it was off the coast. And winds on the gusty side there, as I mentioned, anywhere from 20 gusts 35 to 40 miles an hour. Forecast for tonight, that pattern doesn't change much up there. It stays pretty breezy. Northern half of the state, mostly clear and dry. Pick the clouds up, Tanana Valley and southward. And the showers and thunderstorms, mostly thunderstorms, will be along the Alaska Range, down into the western Alaska Range, McKinley, and possibly northern Kuskokwim Valley, on out toward the Nulato Hills. And then showers over south central Alaska tonight and clouds. Drying out, though, for Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula, and the North Gulf Coast, with maybe some clearing later on, and stays kind of cloudy and showery there over the Panhandle, and possible minimum gale force winds along the Alaska Peninsula, gale force gusts anyway. Windy already picking up there, as I mentioned, and another shot of rain and wind as that low actually deepens as it moves up to the northeast with that front in advance of that, bringing good shot of rain, good solid rain into the peninsula tonight, and wet back to the west of Shemya. Outlook for Sunday. Tomorrow, about the same as you saw today for the Arctic coast, North Slope, and much of the northern half of the state, back into the 70s. And cooler, 50s, lower 60s for highs for southern Alaska tomorrow. And Panhandle looks wet. Remnants of that front keeps it pretty damp and cloudy. Same thing for the North Gulf Coast, but rainfall not as heavy as what you saw today. Showers to the Kenai Peninsula. Chance of showers there at Kodiak Island. And the front weakening along the Alaska Peninsula keeps rain, but not quite as heavy. And a little breezy, and that pattern extending over the Aleutians. Dry and breezy for the Pribilofs. Mostly clear again for the northern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island. Outlook for Monday. Maybe a little bit better chance of low clouds and fog on the Arctic coast. Otherwise, not much change occurring up there or over the northern half of the state. Looks like cooler temperatures, though, into the Tanana Valley and westward to the Seward Peninsula, with a little bit additional moisture and clouds. Isolated afternoon thunderstorms being triggered by afternoon heating from the Nulato Hills eastward across the Tanana Valley to the eastern interior. Showers, Copper River Basin, Talkeetnas, Chugach. Rain or showers, North Gulf Coast, southern Kenai Peninsula. Generally partly cloudy or partly sunny, mostly cloudy. Cook Inlet's the Sitna-Manuska Valley. Cloudy with showers, Kodiak, and another front pushes another batch of rain in toward the Panhandle in the afternoon. Weakening low pressure keeps it unsettled for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, with showery conditions for the Aleutians. And for Sunday morning lows, upper 20s, eastern Arctic coast, 30s to the west, upper 40s to lower 50s over the western interior, maybe even mid-50s on the lower Yukon River Valley areas, 40s over southern Alaska. And for tomorrow afternoon, highs again back into the 70s, 75 to 80 for the Fairbanks area, in the 70s upper Yukon Valley, eastward to Northway, Eagle, and 70s all the way down toward Bethel. And once again, possibly for the central Seward Peninsula, looking at 64 for the high for Nome. And 35 to 40 for the high central eastern Arctic coast, much like today, up toward 50 on the west side. 65 to 70 for Bristol Bay, 50s Alaska Peninsula, 40s out over the Aleutians. Lows 25 to 30 North Slope Arctic coast on Monday morning. Not much change over the interior from tomorrow morning. They'll be followed by cooler highs over the Tanana Valley, back down 60 to 70, 50 southern Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic for Sunday morning. We've got IFR along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, marginal VFR central coast, VFR on the west side, VFR just about all of interior Alaska, out off the southwest coast there. Bristol Bay looking good. Some marginal VFR there in northern Kodiak Island up along the North Gulf Coast, and on down coastal areas of the Panhandle. Lots of IFR from the Alaska Peninsula to Amchitka and Kitska Island, northward to the Pribilofs and up to western St. Lawrence Island. That breaks up in the afternoon out there with a lot of marginal VFR left behind over the Bering Sea and better conditions over the Aleutians as well, but still some areas of IFR. VFR, Bristol Bay, up into all interior Alaska, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Marginal VFR in areas forming along the western and central Alaska range, becoming a little more widespread over the Talkeetna Mountains, across the central eastern Copper River Basin to the North Gulf Coast. Some IFR now right off the central coast of the Panhandle, otherwise a marginal VFR afternoon from Dixon Entrance to Lincoln Glacier Bay up towards Skagway. Monday morning, IFR North Slope, Arctic coast, good VFR in the interior again, some leftover marginal VFR possible there over the upper Tanana Valley area. Otherwise, North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR from Kodiak Island and Lake Iliamna eastward to the coastal areas of the Panhandle. IFR along and south of the Alaska Peninsula and over the eastern Aleutians, central Aleutians. Marginal VFR for the Bering Sea with IFR along the Yukon Delta coast up through the Bering Strait. And for the afternoon, mostly VFR over interior Alaska, marginal VFR North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, IFR. Looks like Cape Yakataga toward just west of Yakutat and then on down the southeast coastal areas, marginal VFR, the remainder of the Panhandle. IFR northern Bering Sea, IFR southern Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutians, and marginal for the remainder of the Aleutian chain, including the Pribilofs. Anaktuvik, VFR tomorrow. Adigan, Sunday, good VFR as well. Either approach the entire day. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR. Increase in the clouds. There would be increase in the clouds in the afternoon with some buildups, but put the thunderstorm there, possible for rainy, possibly becoming marginal VFR, possibly becoming marginal for windy as well, with a risk of thunderstorms. And same forecast with Isabel, VFR turning toward marginal. Whether it gets there or not is another story. Risk of a thunderstorm. And from Antasta, better chance of seeing marginal VFR there as well as to go along with the chance of thunderstorms. Tanita, VFR, maybe trending toward marginal VFR and just a slight chance of a thunderstorm. Portage, marginal VFR possible on the eastern entrance, otherwise not too bad. And Chilkoot and White, VFR becoming marginal. Freezing levels 6 to 8,000 feet over Alaska and 4 to 6,000 feet out over the Aleutians. And icing areas of mixed possible or pretty good chance over the Copper River Basin in some areas there at some point in the day tomorrow on down. The Panhandle kind of tapers off though as you head west, and a couple of zones of rime icing, leftover frontal moisture, Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, and southeastern Bering Sea. Jet stream, well to the south of the forecast area, a little closer to the western Aleutians, but still off to the south, 150 knot jet over the south side of that low near the Fox Islands. And it stays even farther to the south, and upper level low off the Panhandle. It's circulating moisture in and then back westward, easterly flow across southern Alaska. High pressure dominating the northern interior and the central areas as well. Taking a look at 9,000 feet. We've got obviously the windiest areas there coming across the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast, 40 to 50 knots, turning more easterly at about 40 knots across the Pribilofs, and from Nunivak Island across the northern or central Bering Sea areas, northeast over St. Lawrence Island, wrapping back around. Lighter winds becoming more northerly over the western Aleutians, light over the central Aleutians. Not too much wind-wise over the interior, just south of the Brooks Range from the upper Yukon, Koyukuk, Kobuk, Selawik Valley areas. This could be a little breezy there at 9,000 feet. And then off the southeast coast, that weakening system really doesn't affect the winds much at all, not even along the coastline, a little bit more over the eastern Gulf. And southern Alaska, light variable winds, but the Alaska Peninsula, 40 to 55 knot winds, 50 to 55 actually coming right across the peninsula there. Turbulence, occasional moderate chop along and on the lee side of the Alaska Peninsula.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us once again is our good friend Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska. Thanks again for joining us, Eric. We really appreciate it, as always.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks. And, we're going to ask you some more satellite questions here, but,
Okay.
since you're a regular guest, we're going to give you a riddle this time, kind of a trick start to the show.
Okay.
How do you see a polar bear in a snowstorm?
Sounds like a challenging question because
Okay.
the polar bear is white and the snowstorm's white.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Well, in the world of satellite meteorology, you couldn't, because the spatial resolution of this instrument that we're going to talk about today has 375 meters resolution, and even the most well-fed polar bear will not be 375 meters across.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to run into such a
that'd be a
creature,
bad day.
would you? In the satellite meteorology world, the equivalent would be, how do you tell the difference between clouds and then an area that has no clouds but's covered by snow,
Right.
a piece of ocean that has no clouds but has sea ice?
Ah.
All three of these are white. The
Right.
snow, the clouds, the sea ice, it's all white. So how, using satellite data, can you tell someone where the clouds are and where the clear areas are? This is important for aviators. Mariners want to know, in the ocean there, this white stuff, is that sea ice or is that just a cloud?
Right.
How do we tell the difference? And it turns out, if you look, say, at a picture of Alaska from the springtime, March or April, and it's high noon, so we're getting a lot of sunshine. If you were riding on a satellite with your human eye, look down, everything's white.
Right.
And we've got a picture of Alaska from early April, and we're seeing some of the lower elevations in south central Alaska are melting out, getting some brown ground there, but otherwise there's a whole lot of white on the image. What areas are cloudy, but what areas are clear and covered by snow or ice?
Okay.
It turns out that if we leave the visible spectrum behind a little bit, see, a satellite has multiple channels in the electromagnetic spectrum that it can look at.
Oh, okay.
Part of that's visible light, what we
Right.
see as humans, but there's a lot going on at other wavelengths. If we add in something that's called near infrared, what we couldn't quite see, but we're getting into that infrared territory, there's a magical property that we can exploit.
Secrets to find. Okay.
Oh yeah, this is actually powerful and almost magical, that at a slightly longer wavelength, when the sun shines down on Alaska and then it bounces off back to the satellite, at that near infrared wavelength, it turns out that snow and ice will absorb that wavelength, but liquid water, like liquid droplets in a cloud, will reflect it back.
Okay.
And that's not the way it works in visible. Visible, it just bounces off of all those targets the same. But at near infrared, snow and ice absorbs it, and the liquid will reflect it back. Liquid cloud droplets will do that.
Okay.
And so an image where everything looks white suddenly becomes colorful.
Oh,
And the way this recipe works is that the clouds look pink, and the snow-covered ground and the ice-covered ocean look blue. Suddenly now, we're able to see the polar bear in the snowstorm. We're able to see where the clouds are and where the snow is and where the ice is. This is a powerful advantage. Consider the case zooming into the Bering Strait area. What if you were asked to brief a pilot who wanted to fly, say, from Kotzebue down to Savunga or Gamble, and had to fly VFR, visual flight rules, so they had to stay out of the clouds? Could you use a satellite image where everything is white to provide that pilot any guidance?
It'd be pretty tricky.
Very tricky. And that's why we have to go to this other recipe where the all-white polar bear in the snowstorm becomes more colorful. And now we can tell the pilot, aha, this is a cloud you want to stay out of, but over here, sure, it looks white in the visible spectrum, but what we're doing, we'll show you, oh, this is just snow-covered ground, but it's clear, so you can fly right through there, visual flight rules. Same thing for a mariner who might want to get down to St. Lawrence Island, say, but it has to avoid the sea ice. This product has applicability there as well.
Wonderful.
It's an amazing new technology, so many new channels. The satellite that makes this imagery actually has 22 different channels that it looks at.
22 secret decoder rings.
22 secret decoder rings.
Okay. You know, I liken this to an activity I had in the car when I was growing up. We go on long car rides, and we do all the work in these activity books to, you know, stay calm, cool, and collected for our parents who were trying to get us across the state. But to get the answer, the real answer, you had to apply that red sheet to see the answer or the secret path or whatever the message was in that activity book to get you onto the next page. And it's also like a photography filter, right? If you're taking a lot of pictures, you can apply different colors to see different parts of that image. I mean, that sounds a lot like what you're talking about.
Oh, you know it. The information is in there all along. We just have to combine the channels in a way to reveal what's in there. And by the way, you're dating yourself. So you didn't have an iPad in the back of the car?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, we have, lastly, for dessert, there's a great image of the same kind of recipe. We're looking at South Central Alaska the first week of January. In first week of January, the sun, even at noon, is really low on the horizon, barely up. And in this image, the fun thing is the shadow of Denali. We can see the shadow of Denali over a lower pink cloud deck.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And Denali at 20,000 feet casts a big shadow. So this is another, just for fun, kind of application here. This is called multispectral satellite imagery, and it's the future. And happily, the future is now.
Oh, that is fascinating. And 22 different secrets that can be revealed from just one satellite tool that's floating overhead. Eric, thanks so much for joining us again. We can't wait to have you back and telling us more secrets of satellite technology that are passing over us every single day, many times a day, over Alaska and helping us all the way in many different parts of our lives. So thanks so much for joining us again.
Well, happy to be here.
All right. And thank you for staying with us. We'll be back with a little more weather here in just a few minutes. And of course, we'll have more Alaska weather facts anytime online.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast. South coast of the Panhandle there, south at 20 knots, with seas at about 20 feet, and then east-southeast 20 knots on the north coast, 6 to 7 foot seas there. Clarence Strait, southerlies at 15, seas 3 feet, a little brisker in Stevens Passage, south winds 20 knots. South winds 20 knots, Lynn Canal. We're looking for gales force gust at 35 knots, and seas running at about 4 feet. And the outlook for Monday, Lynn Canal down to 15 knots from the south and seas around 3 feet. Southeast 20, Stevens Passage, 4-foot seas. Gale warnings, Clarence Strait, southeast 35 knots in the afternoon. South winds increasing to 35 knots on the south coast, so gale warnings there. And the north coast there, extreme north coast, gale warnings also, south to southeast 30 to 40 knots, 12 to 13-foot seas. And for Prince William Sound, light east winds tomorrow, seas 2 feet, 15-knot winds from the east for the North Gulf Coast, seas running 5 feet. Same forecast for the Barren Islands, southeast 20 knots for Kamishak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet, southwest wind at 20 with seas 5 feet. North of Foreland, southerlies of 15 and seas at 4 feet. For Monday, swing those winds around to the northeast at 20 knots, all of Cook Inlet, 4 to 5 foot seas. Small craft advisories, Kamishak Bay. Easterly, sustained 25 knots and 30-knot east winds with 11-foot seas for the Barren Islands, and small craft advisories for the western North Gulf Coast. Gale warnings for the eastern North Gulf Coast for 35-knot winds out of the east, seas building to 13 feet. And easterlies at 25 with 6-foot seas for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, northeast, 30 knots for Shelikof Strait. Otherwise, east side of the island, lighter winds east at 20. And then Sitkanak to Castle Cay, small craft advisories, east winds 30 knots, east winds 35 knots. Gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, 8 to 11-foot seas, and easterlies at 20 for Bristol Bay. For Monday, Bristol Bay, east at 25, turn northeast on down the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. South side from Cape Saratchev to Castle Cape, northeast at 20, and then up the east side of Kodiak Island, southeast winds 20 knots on Monday with 11-foot seas, and Shelikof Strait, small craft advisories, northeast 30 knots. For Unalaska Island, east-northeast 30 knots tomorrow, 10 to 12-foot seas. Umak Island, north to northeast 20 to 30 knots. AKwx, north to northwest at 20, 30-knot winds for Kiska and Mchitka, and then 20 knots out of the northwest for Shimianatu. On Monday, western Aleutians, far western zones west at 15 as you approach Amchitka, northwest at 20. Adakaнаtka, 15 to 20 knot northwest winds. Unmak Island looking at north to northwest at 20 knots. On Alaska Island, northerlies 20 knots, 7 to 10 foot seas. For the southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta coast, northeast at 20, seas 5 feet. Those pick up to sustain 25 knots with 8 foot seas for small craft advisories, St. George and St. Paul. And the Yukon Delta coast to St. Lawrence Island, look for northerlies at 20 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas. Norton Sound, northeast at 15, and St. Matthew Island, northeast at 20. For Monday, St. Lawrence Island, northerlies at 20 knots. Pretty light northerlies at 10 along the Yukon Delta coast. South of Nunivak Island, small craft advisories, north 25, and northerlies at 20 knots for the St. Matthew, St. Paul, and St. George Island areas. Eastern Beaufort Seacoast tomorrow, brisk wind advisories again, like today, east 25 to 30 knots sustained, about 20 knots on the central coast, back up to small craft advisories on the west side, and then east turn north at 20 from Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales. Those pick up to 30 knots from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, and east 30 on the western Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories for the central and eastern coast for Monday. Pretty sustained out of the east, and then for the area from Wales to Cape Thompson, winds will be out of the northwest at about 20 knots with 4 foot seas. And you can see the gradient associated with the gusty winds up there from the North Slope and Arctic coast due to the high sitting just off the eastern Arctic coast and the lower pressure over the southern interior. Look for some thunderstorms along that trough axis, cloudier, cooler, showery, wetter, moving into from Prince William Sound into south central Alaska, but drying out for the North Gulf Coast. Showers for the Panhandle, gusty winds and rain, moderate to heavy at times for the Alaska Peninsula tonight. That frontal weekend, it'll stay wet, kind of hangs up right along the peninsula there in weekend, so kind of wet and breezy. Well, will be wet and breezy through Sunday there. Showers and rain for the Panhandle, and wet for southern Alaska with isolated thunderstorms over the mountainous terrain, and about the same on Monday, but cooler over the central interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.